Now for updates on the Russia-Ukraine crisis, Governor of Russia's Belgorod region, Vyacheslav Gladkov, says Ukrainian forces had shelled the border town of Shebekino using Soviet-era rocket systems, setting one residential building in the town ablaze. He said the attacks had also damaged the local administration building and injured 2 residents. Mr. Gladkov had reported heavy shelling overnight by Ukrainian forces, saying this had resulted in 8 people being wounded and led to the evacuation of local residents. The Russian Defense Military says it repelled 3 attacks by Ukrainian terrorist groups, adding that they were pushed back, suffering significant losses. Meanwhile, 5 people have been killed and 19 others wounded following the Ukrainian shelling of a village in the Russian-controlled East Ukrainian region of Luhansk. A Moscow-installed coordination center says Ukrainian forces had used rocket launchers to attack a poultry farm in the village of Kapati, adding that a camp of road construction workers and their vehicles had been hit. There was no immediate response from Ukraine, but Kyiv almost never publicly claims responsibility for attacks in Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine or in Russia. Both sides deny targeting civilians in the 15-month-long crisis and what Russia is calling a special military operation that Russia launched in February 2022. Meanwhile, officials in the Ukrainian capital say a Russian missile attack on Kyiv has killed 3 people, including 2 children, and injured 14 others. The Kyiv military administration confirmed in a statement that this was the 18th attack on the capital this month. Kyiv Mayor Vitaly Klitschko says 9 people needed hospital treatment immediately. Emergency crews have extinguished fires caused by falling debris near the sites of the strikes. Air raid alerts in Kyiv and in most of eastern Ukraine were in effect for about an hour. Meanwhile, dashboard camera captured the moment when part of a missile fell next to a car driving on Kyiv roads as Russia attacked Ukraine's capital. Authorities say all the Russian missiles were shot down, but 1 person in the central Podil district was taken to hospital, adding that no major damage was reported. Russia has increased the frequency of air attacks as Ukraine prepares to launch a counteroffensive. And more on the crisis, White House National Security spokesperson John Kirby says the Biden administration does not know who is responsible for a drone attack in Moscow this week. Speaking to reporters about the incident, Mr. Kirby said the U.S. does not have specific information that tells us who is responsible for an attack on an apartment building in Moscow, adding that Ukraine had denied responsibility. Asked whether the attack was part of the Ukrainian spring offensive, he said it's up to the Ukrainian military to explain when and how their counteroffensive starts.
Well, we've seen the Ukrainian denial that they had anything to do. You're talking about the drone strike on the apartment building in Moscow. So we'd refer you to the Ukrainian government to speak to that. We don't have any specific information that tells us who is responsible, and it's not like we're going to go out and investigate this. It's not that wouldn't be appropriate for us to do. And then your second question on the counteroffensive. Again, we would let President Zelensky speak to this. Wherever, whenever the Ukrainian military is ready to step off here and get started, that's really going to be up to them to talk about and to explain. I would just tell you that over just the last few weeks alone, there has been a lot of fighting and a lot of back and forth here.
In the meantime, the White House has announced the latest in a series of aid packages for Ukraine, including up to $300 million worth of air defense systems, ammunition, and other defense equipment. The security assistance package includes air defense batteries, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, tank ammunition, among others. In total, the U.S. has committed more than $38.3 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Biden administration, including more than $37.6 billion since Russia's invasion in February 2022.
Russia has continued to wage just a brutal, completely unprovoked war against Ukraine, launching yet more airstrikes and bombarding Ukrainian cities all across the country. In fact, in just this here month of May, Russia's launched 17 different air assaults against Kyiv, harming civilians, devastating civilian areas, hitting civilian infrastructure. Now, in response, the United States is going to continue to support Ukraine, help give them things that they need to better defend themselves. As part of all that effort, we've got an upcoming package here, which will be the 39th drawdown of equipment from the Department of Defense inventories using presidential drawdown authorities. We will use that package that we're announcing today to provide Ukraine with additional munitions for Patriot air defense systems, which Ukraine has been deploying quite effectively, as well as more Avenger air defense systems, Stinger anti-aircraft systems, and ammunition, of course, for the HIMARS, artillery, and anti-armor systems that the United States continues to provide to Ukraine. And as for the debt ceiling deal, it won't, no matter what happens in the halls of Congress, there won't be an effect on our ability to support Ukraine.
European leaders posed for a family photo in Moldova at a European Political Community Summit in a show of support for the former Soviet Republic that applied to join the European Union after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The summit of the EU's 27 member states and 20 other European countries at a castle deep in Moldovan wine country is taking place just 20 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. More than 40 European leaders arrived in Moldova today to attend the summit. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has joined other EU leaders for that summit in Moldova, speaking to reporters as he stood beside Moldovan President Maia Sandu. Mr. Zelensky said that Ukraine was ready to be in the NATO military alliance and that Kyiv was waiting for the bloc to be ready to admit his country.
A little bit later. Thank you very much. We spoke about our bilateral relations, about, I think, some infrastructure, very principal priority projects, and we will sign in the closest future. And I think what is very important, our future in EU, and Ukraine is ready to be in NATO. We are waiting when NATO will be ready to host and to see and to have Ukraine. And I think security guarantees are very important, not only for Ukraine, for our neighbors, for Moldova, because of the Russia and of their aggression in Ukraine and potential aggression for other part of Europe. I think Stoltenberg supporting us and supported when I had bilateral meeting with him, but it's you know that we need all the unity through our alliance. So and we work on it. When we'll win, the war will stop, or Russia can stop this war earlier. They can go out to their independent territory from our territory.
Let's get more of this. The VOA's Ricardo Makina joins me now for more. Hi, Ricardo. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so more than 40 European leaders are in Moldova for this summit. Bring us up to speed on this meeting.
So right now, the most important is the meeting is having place. Is this a new, absolutely new format of meeting, and it's taking place as you told, really near of the Ukrainian border, really near of the city of Odessa. To see Zelensky today in Moldova, that till 3 years ago was a pro-Russian country, pro-Russian territory, is a historic moment. Now we don't await really not big declaration of this meeting. The important is these European leaders, these world leaders that are showing political unity used in the border with Ukraine.
So what's the security situation like in Moldova, being so close to Ukraine? We know, of course, that this Ukraine's neighbor, and Ukraine has constantly been shelled this week by Russia.
I've been working in Moldova for the last year and a half, and it's a highly divided country. We have a part of the population that is Romanian speakers that feel themselves as Romanian. They feel themselves as European, but it's true that we have between 30 and 45% of population that there are only Russian speakers, that they get their information from the Russian propaganda TV channels. And for them, Russia is not the past. For them, Russia is the present. So it's a very complicated situation for the actual pro-European government. Any kind of crisis, economical crisis, as we saw the last half a year, with the prices of the gas and energy rising, can put this government to a very dramatic end. So the support shown today by European countries is very important for this pro-European government that is now ruling Moldova.
Right. So we've seen the United States promising more support for Ukraine in financial aid, in military aid. This gathering in Moldova, I mean, what are we expecting for them in terms of support for Ukraine?
So, in terms of support for Ukraine, as right now, we see a very strong position for the United States, also for the majority of the European countries, but now for Moldova, that we can expect is more political support to support the European integration path that this government started almost 2 years ago. Moldova is a neutral country by constitution. Moldova cannot join right now NATO or any kind of military alliance, but they can join European Union or other political alliance. So if we talk about Ukraine, it's clear Western countries can help with economic help and military help, but from Moldova, what they are demanding now is to speed the process of the European integration.
And so we've seen all world leaders gather for one summit or the other. Last month we had the G7 meeting, now the Moldova summit, and then the NATO summit, which will hold in July. Is this an indirect way, of sending a message to the Russian President Vladimir Putin to stop his illegal war in Ukraine?
Indeed, there are here a clear message to Moscow. It's clear that European Union is a political alliance, it's not a military alliance, so it's very difficult to them to put some kind of red lines to Russia in the military way. But they can support Moldova, they can support Ukraine. In the NATO summit that we will see in Vilnius in a few weeks, it will be much more important, as we will see the NATO leaders using the border with Russia and the Baltic states. That will be indeed a very important moment. We will see if in that moment we see some kind of change in the battlefield, as Russia is showing themselves not capable to win this war. And now we are waiting for this announced counter-offensive of Ukraine. So this meeting today in Moldova is important, but in military terms, the summit in Vilnius will be a historical moment.
And writes the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he's waiting for, the bloc, NATO, to be ready, when it's ready to admit his country. When is this likely to be? Have you heard of anything since this summit began on when, Kyiv is likely to be admitted?
So it's one of the most complicated questions. Of course, I have not an answer. We see the NATO is changing the reply to this question. A few years ago was a very, very strong no. Ukraine will be not part of NATO, and now we see how this answer is changing to maybe someday. So the possibility of Ukraine join the NATO is near that was 1 year ago, much near that was 2 years ago, but it will not be a possibility till the war ends, and this war can be a very long war.
And so Russia says, it will only stop the war when it wins. Ukraine is also saying the same. So with all the help that Ukraine is getting, when do you suppose this counteroffensive that Ukraine has been promising will start?
So I'm not a military expert, but I've been to Ukraine several times. I've been in Donbass for a long time also. So from June, July will be the most appropriate time because the ground will be dry. So to do this counter-offensive. But we see now how the Ukrainian or Russian joined Ukrainian army that are attacking Russian territory in Belgorod. So maybe we are seeing some kind of different approach to the war. So we see that Ukraine maybe will be not try to do this counter-offensive in Ukrainian territory, but in the south of Russia. But it's impossible to know. And of course, the Ukrainian army is trying to keep their secrets as more secrets than they could do. So it's impossible to answer your question.
Yes,
Sorry.
I can quite understand keeping everything to your chest. Ricardo, I must thank you for shedding more light on this on The World Today.
Thank you to you.
Welcome back to The World Today as we continue our coverage of the Russian war in Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says all NATO allies agree that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. Speaking ahead of a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in the Norwegian capital, Oslo, Mr. Stoltenberg says he would soon travel to Turkey to discuss Sweden's NATO membership bid, but noted Sweden already enjoyed a high degree of protection from the US-led military alliance.
All allies agree that it is for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when Ukraine becomes a member. It's not for Moscow to have a veto against NATO enlargement. Sweden is now integrating more and more into NATO structures, our military structures, our civilian structures, and several allies also provided bilateral security assurances for Sweden. So it's absolutely inconceivable that there will be any threat or any attack against Sweden without NATO reacting. I will travel to Ankara in the near future, exactly when is not yet decided. So what we have seen in Kosovo is increased tensions, and we have also seen the violence against NATO peacekeepers, the KFOR forces. And this is totally unacceptable, unprovoked violence against peacekeepers from NATO with a clear UN mandate. So the first deployment of extra troops will be around 700, and they are on their way. But of course, this does not mean that we are giving up on a political solution. Our message, both to Belgrade and to Pristina, is that they have to engage in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue. That's the only path to peace.
Estonian Foreign Minister Margus Tsahkna says Ukraine should be given a very clear path towards becoming a NATO member. In the meantime, Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström, whose country is not yet a member of the US-led alliance, says time had come for Turkey and Hungary to ratify its NATO membership application. Sweden and Finland applied for NATO membership following Russia's invasion of Ukraine on February the 24th, 2022. However, while Finland joins the Western Military Alliance in April, Sweden's bid has been held up by objections from Turkey and Hungary.
We very clearly support the idea to give a very clear path to Ukraine to entering to NATO as a full member. I'm in a position that NATO is a clear and strong security guarantee for Ukraine after the war. And we must give a very strong message that there won't be any gray zones anymore in the neighboring of Russia.
Everything that we undertook to deliver during the Madrid summit is fulfilled, and it is time for Turkey and Hungary to start the ratification of the Swedish membership to NATO. That is the clear message that I will send, and I have already received, before this meeting, clear signs of the commitment and the support that we feel from several of the NATO member states. And I believe that this will be reinforced during today's meeting as well.
Meanwhile, Norwegian Foreign Minister Anniken Huitfeldt says Sweden should become a full member of the NATO military alliance as soon as possible and before the NATO summit in July. She believes there's nothing that the alliance is waiting for and there's absolutely no reason for holding Sweden back.
Sweden now participates in NATO's meeting as an official NATO invitee. Sweden must become fully fledged NATO member as soon as possible and before the summit in Vilnius in July. I have raised it several times when I had a meeting with the Turkish foreign minister. He can unfortunately not come to this meeting because there is going to be an opening session of the Turkish parliament on Thursday. But I have raised this several times. And Sweden fulfills all the criteria. So there is absolutely no reason for holding Sweden back.
The German Federal Foreign Office says the German government will close 4 out of the 5 Russian consulates in the country by revoking their licenses after Moscow limited the number of German officials in Russia. According to the office, the Russian embassy in Berlin, as well as 1 consulate general, will continue to operate. The measures will take effect from the end of the year. Germany's move came after the Russian government set an upper limit of 350 for the number of German government officials, including those working in cultural institutions and schools who can stay in Russia. Germany and Russia have repeatedly expelled each other's diplomats. However, the situation has worsened considerably since the start of the crisis in Ukraine, which led to massive sanctions against Russia by the EU. And Moscow says Germany's decision to reduce Russia's diplomatic presence on its soil was an ill-thought-out move and vowed a response. The Russian Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying that Germany's decision was unfriendly and further damaged the relationship between the two countries, and the German side should be responsible for the deterioration of the relationship between them. According to the statement, the Russian side will also take corresponding actions against such provocative decisions. A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry said the limitation was a response to Germany's previous expulsion of Russian diplomats. The New Development Bank Vice President Vladimir Kazbekov intends to think about ways it can fulfill its obligations to Russia in compliance with the restrictions on the financial capital. The NDB Vice President and Chief Operating Officer made the comments at a press conference in conjunction with the bank's 8th annual meeting in Shanghai. In March last year, days after Russia invaded Ukraine, the NDB announced it would stop funding new projects in Russia to assure investors it was compliant with Western-led sanctions against Moscow. It also scrambled to win confidence from investors worried about its shareholding structure.
Since all this crisis started, Russia fully provide full payments for all its obligations. So we have no problems with that part. And considering that special role as a founding member, Russian special role, NDB intends to think about fulfillment of its obligation vis-à-vis Russia in compliance with applicable restrictions introduced on financial and capital markets.